Growing Pains, a Legends of Chima fanfiction written by Jukebox Straws, read by Jukebox Straws. Longtooth, am I too intense? Longtooth blinked. Pardon, sir? LaGravis says I'm too intense sometimes. Is that true? The saddened face of the Lion King made Longtooth clam up. He kept his eyes down as he continued to wrap LaGravis's ankle in bandages, the scrape there not quite having stopped its bleeding. Well, you certainly are passionate, sir. LaGravis sighed and sat on his throne, running a hand through his hair, already streaked with gray and white. Though the Lion King was only barely approaching the proper age to even consider graying hair, being king was certainly a draining task. Longtooth had been there through it all, ever since LaGravis's coronation, as his personal guard. I know he doesn't mean it as a bad thing, but I get the sense that people avoid me sometimes. LaGravis leaned against the armrest, resting his face in his palm. Longtooth gave him a sympathetic smile. That's not true, sir. I don't avoid you. That's because it's your job not to avoid me, LaGravis pouted. Longtooth nearly chuckled at the sight of such a regal man pouting on its throne while his personal guard tended to his injured ankle. I still wouldn't avoid you, even if I wasn't your personal guard. I find you most excellent company, sir. Longtooth smiled as he pinned the bandage in place, clawed hands lingering on LaGravis's leg. His fingers sifted through the short, coarse fur. A soft purr echoed through the empty hall. I know you wouldn't lie to me, Longtooth. LaGravis's voice rumbled deep in his chest, and his golden eyes flashed with desire so heavy that Longtooth found himself surprisingly short of breath. Never, sir. It's my job to protect you. It had been a long time since they had any opportunities to be alone together. While relationships of this nature between the Lion King and his personal guard were not strictly forbidden, LaGravis knew it would stir up some kind of ruckus if word got out. LaGravis didn't like ruckus. Longtooth knew that for certain. He knew the Lion King preferred a nice quiet evening, watching the sunset from the giant window in his quarters, a cup of tea and a good book, and good conversation. So they had decided to keep their relationship a secret. If not for the trouble it would no doubt stir up, Longtooth was pretty sure that LaGravis also just liked the thrill of the secrecy. And you do such a wonderful job at it, Longtooth. LaGravis ran his fingers through Longtooth's mane as the lion placed a gentle kiss on his king's knee. His ears twitched, making sure nobody was going to interrupt their little tryst in the vast empty hall. Every one of their movements echoed over the stones and the soft whoosh of the waterfall behind the throne. But he heard no footsteps approaching, no voices. This part of the castle would be completely empty at this time of night. Longtooth was secretly thankful that LaGravis and LaGravis had decided to have a little late-night sparring session. Laval and LaGravis were both asleep now, surely. Leonidas was guarding Laval's room, Lennox guarding LaGravis. Nobody would need to move from their posts for a good long while. Do I, sir? Longtooth slowly stood from his kneeling position beside the king, running his hands up until he reached the hem of LaGravis's kilt, just above his knees. Yes, LaGravis breathed, and Longtooth could feel it against the fur on his face as he leaned over his king sitting on his throne. His joints were beginning to pain him, and Longtooth knew it wouldn't be too long before his back gave out. He wasn't as young and spry as he used to be, and his long-lasting battle injuries didn't help his old, weary bones stay any stronger. He decided it would be best if he sat down, give his aching knees a rest. So he sat, right on LaGravis's lap, straddling his thighs on the throne. Longtooth. LaGravis was cut off as Longtooth dove in for a searing kiss. Pressing the Lion King against the back of his throne, cupping his jaw in his hands, Longtooth felt LaGravis's fingers dig into his thighs, massaging the sore muscles, helping him relax. His muscles were always sore in one way or another, a consequence of his old age, and he was grateful that LaGravis took that into consideration. LaGravis was always thinking of others, putting everyone before himself, one of the traits that made him such a good king, he supposed. though it often led to LaGravis ignoring his own needs in the meantime, but Longtooth supposed he could rectify that right now. "It is my job to protect you," Longtooth breathed as he tugged on the knot that kept his king's cloak attached to the harness. "But it's also my job to take care of you, to make sure you're safe, healthy, and happy." "You already do that every day, Longtooth." LaGravis assisted his guard in removing the cloak and harness, leaving him in just his tunic and kilt. "Well, I want to do it now. Let me take care of you, LaGravis." Longtooth rarely said LaGravis's name, rarely when they were alone, never when they were around others. But when LaGravis's hands tightened their hold and the Lion King's breath hitched as he lifted his hips slightly upwards, Longtooth strongly considered using it more often. You could feel the rasp of calloused hands moving over soft fur and skin, LaGravis's fingertips dragging over his own muscles, soothing his aching bones. The soothing mist of the waterfall, the hum of the sacred pool behind him, combined with LaGravis's burning touch and soft kisses against his lips, was enough to bring Longtooth some semblance of comfort and contentment. He could be happy to stay just like this, forever. "Am I interrupting something?" LaGravis gasped as he quickly pulled back. Longtooth felt his muscles stiffening underneath him as they both turned to see Lavertus, High General of the Lion Tribe Army, and LaGravis's older brother, leaning against a pillar in the entryway to the hall. General Lavertus!" Longtooth quickly scrambled off of the king, wincing as his joints cried out in protest at moving so quickly. "Lavertus, I can explain," LaGravis began, his face a flaming red. But Lavertus just held up his hand, silencing both of them. Longtooth kept his eyes on the ground, embarrassment filling his body at being caught when he had been so sure that nobody had been around. He knew Lavertus's insomnia kept him awake most nights, but he hadn't even heard the lion approach. "I had already had my suspicions that you two were involved." Lavertus let out a soft chuckle, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "But I didn't think you would be so bold as to try it out in the sacred throne room, though, I will admit. That's ballsy even for my standards." "It was my idea, sir." Longtooth took a protective step between Lavertus and the Lion King, keeping his head down, as Lavertus was still technically his superior, after coming out of exile and being restored to his former status as High General of the Lion Army. Though he had been born first, Lavertus had renounced the throne before he had even had the chance to become king, letting LaGravis take on the duty instead. Lavertus wasn't fit to lead a kingdom. His diplomatic skills were, frankly, worse than skin its smell. It made sense that he felt more at home commanding soldiers instead. Was it now? Lavertus pushed himself off the pillar and stepped forward, crossing his arms in some feigned display of authority, even though he was in nothing but a loosely fitting silk robe and a pair of polka-dot underwear, clearly having been preparing for sleep. "Well, if you're going to fuck my brother, Longtooth, just make sure Laval isn't the one to catch you next time. The poor boy is traumatized enough already." Lavertus's piercing golden eyes looked between his brother and his guard, clearly deducing that there was no threat to LaGravis's life here. If LaGravis trusted Longtooth, then Lavertus would trust him as well. However, that didn't save them from Lavertus's use of the Big Brother card. "I would also suggest saving any future trysts for the king's private quarters." "Yes, sir." Longtooth followed behind LaGravis as the Lion King, clutching his cloak and harness, awkwardly pushed past his brother and into the hallway. Once they made it to LaGravis's bedchamber, Longtooth made sure the door was locked tight before letting out a deep sigh. "I deeply apologize, sir. That was very reckless of me." He turned from the door and froze as he noticed LaGravis already undressing and sitting on the edge of the bed, brows raised expectantly. Longtooth felt his tail swishing behind him, betraying his attempt to hide any of the feelings that flooded him at seeing his king like that. "I don't mind picking up where we left off," LaGravis growled. "Besides, I'm sure your knees would appreciate the softness of my bed rather than my throne. So in a way, this worked in our favor." Wouldn't you agree, Longtooth? Longtooth couldn't argue with that. I suppose I do agree with you, sir. He gently leaned his spear against the wall and began to shed his own clothes. LaGravis's arms wrapped around his neck and pulled him down onto the bed, laying him flat on his back with the Lion King looming over him. I was supposed to be taking care of you, Longtooth protested with a groan as LaGravis pressed kiss after kiss to his neck, fingertips running over the scars that streaked across his chest and the left side of his face. You still are? LaGravis let out a breath as he moved slightly, feeling the hard length pressed against him. Longtooth sucked in a breath, careful that his fangs didn't catch his lover's tongue. Will you indulge me, Longtooth? LaGravis smirked, clenching his lip between his teeth. Longtooth gulped, a bead of sweat forming at the line of his mane as he stared into his lover's golden eyes. Always, LaGravis. One more lingering kiss sent a shiver down the lion's spine as his lover began to move again. Longtooth often had to take their sexual exploits lying down, as his joints and back were finicky things. And after the first time they gave out during sex, causing him to lock up and collapse in pain right as he was reaching the cusp of release, he tried his hardest to ensure that never happened again. Still, he wished he could do more. He wished his failing body would allow him some reprieve so he could take care of his king properly. But it seemed that LaGravis didn't hold those same grievances and was perfectly content with their current activity. LaGravis... Longtooth cut himself off with a yelp when he felt the other lion's mouth sink down onto him. He felt his tail whipping and twitching underneath him, and he felt LaGravis's hand smooth over it, twirling the small tuft of fur at the end around his finger. Longtooth shivered, his tail being especially sensitive, and his king knew all the spots that drove him absolutely up a wall. LaGravis knew Longtooth well, and knew all of his weak spots, the spots that made him shiver and tremble with need. For such a boastful, talkative warrior, Longtooth was surprisingly amenable, especially for his beloved king. A few well-placed kisses and touches, and LaGravis had his lover whimpering and begging for mercy. All his life he had been worried about the needs and emotions of others, even now as a king, as a brother, as a father. All he ever did was worry, worry, worry. He worried about Longtooth sometimes too, worried that the lion's bad joints and aching back would cause him problems, worried that his growing age would only bring about more issues as his reckless youth began to catch up to him. But Longtooth had always kept up with him. For every setback Longtooth experienced, he would find a way around it, find a way to ease LaGravis's nerves somehow, some way. And after some time, LaGravis found that he was wasting his own time worrying about Longtooth. LaGravis. Longtooth choked on a gasp as his back arched. LaGravis pulled away, scrambling on top of his lover to press a searing kiss to his parted lips. Blindly he fumbled with the oil he retrieved from the nightstand drawer, pulling out the stopper between his thumb and pointer finger, while his other finger stayed wrapped around the glass bottle. His other hand was busy pulling Longtooth's hair. The lion beneath him growled, fangs barely scraping over his lover's swollen lower lip. Do you think Lavertus will ask how it's going through the door? Longtooth let out a breathy chuckle. LaGravis groaned and rolled his eyes, a smirk gracing his lips. I sure hope not. LaGravis sat up again, reaching back with slick fingers. Longtooth gripped his king's thighs tight, claws digging into the fur and skin. He felt a long tail wrap around his wrist, keeping them both grounded as LaGravis sank onto him. The growl that bubbled up in Longtooth's throat was involuntary. When LaGravis began to move, Longtooth found that his chest rumbled with even more growls of pleasure. His hands found their way around his king's waist, holding him steady as he began to move recklessly, tail swishing wildly behind him. Getting to see his lover, usually so poised and regal and put together, come apart at the seams on top of him, riding him in the middle of the night when the rest of Chima slept just outside. It was enough to nearly send him over the edge just at the thought alone. He felt a surge of energy, a burst of need within him, and suddenly he found himself pushing up. LaGravis gasped as he was slammed down onto the soft mattress, Longtooth looming over him. Just as soon as they got comfortable in their new position did Longtooth begin to move, and LaGravis felt himself biting back cries of bliss, arms wrapping around his lover's neck, claws digging into his scarred back, legs wrapping tightly around his waist. Longtooth's creaking joints screamed in protest. His back threatened to give out from the hunched position, but he held firm. He wanted to do this for LaGravis, do some of the heavy lifting for once, instead of just being resigned to lie there like a chump while his lover did all the work as usual. He wanted to make LaGravis feel good. He wanted to ease his worry, take away the pain and the stress, just for a moment. LaGravis had seen the most intimate parts of him, even if he didn't know it. Those moments where his aches and pains got the better of him, and he found himself too weak or in too much pain to even get out of bed. LaGravis had cared for him, fed him, bathed him, helped him dress, even though technically that was supposed to be the exact care that Longtooth provided him, not the other way around. Longtooth hated it, feeling weak, knowing others would look upon him with pity in his old age, rather than remembering the strong, fearsome warrior he once was. But LaGravis still saw that warrior. He knew. Deep down he knew that LaGravis never saw him as weak or incapable. He wouldn't have made him his personal guard if he hadn't thought he was capable. Just the fact that LaGravis was willing to keep him around spoke bounds. Compiled with the overwhelming, encompassing warmth he felt with the other lion, Longtooth knew that LaGravis would never think him weak. He could tell that LaGravis felt just the slightest bit safer when he was around. His muscles relaxed ever so slightly, the tension in his shoulders loosened when he felt Longtooth's hand upon them, or the small of his back, in a comforting gesture. He wanted to be his king's comfort, his king's greatest strength, his greatest weakness. He wanted to be everything LaGravis had ever wanted, or needed. LaGravis nearly began seeing stars when Longtooth reached down between them and took his lover into a trembling fist. Hot breath ghosting over his sensitive ears, the Lion King let each wave of pleasure wash over him, growling and gasping as Longtooth tunneled inside him, fangs grazing over his kiss-swollen lips, down his jaw and neck. Such deadly weapons, so close to his throat, so vulnerable. One wrong move, and LaGravis' spotless sheets would be ruined by trickling blood. But he trusted Longtooth, perhaps more so than he trusted Lavertus in some instances. Of course he could tell Lavertus anything, they were brothers after all, but what he felt for Longtooth was just different, more consuming, filling every inch of him. Spending so many years by the side of someone in battle would do those sorts of things to a lion, he supposed. Longtooth had seen the most intimate, vulnerable parts of him, parts that even Lavertus hadn't seen. His greatest fears, his flaws, his deepest desires, his darkest secrets, all were laid bare to the lion overtop him, inside him, every part connected in every way, mind, body, and spirit. He knew no other lion could ever make him feel this way. Longtooth was his, and he was Longtooth's. No one could ever compare or substitute. Longtooth! LaGravis cried out as he came hard, feeling the heat of his surrender as it spilled between them, dripping onto his bare stomach. Longtooth let out a growl and a snarl as he knelt on the bed, gripping his lover's hips and moving faster. LaGravis' ears twitched when he heard the popping of the other lion's joints as he moved, a sound that came with age. "LaGravis, I love you," Longtooth gasped, and he stuttered to a halt, and LaGravis closed his eyes in complete bliss. As soon as he gained enough breath to speak again, LaGravis opened his mouth. "I love you too, Longtooth." They had never explicitly said that they loved each other until that very moment. It had always been a silent agreement between them, something that started just as a fulfillment of a dirty fantasy for both of them, two older men that still had those unbecoming teenage thoughts. That soon blossomed into genuine romance, familiarity, and affection. "Should we have a bath, sir?" Longtooth tacked on the "sir" part teasingly, as if he wasn't still buried balls deep inside his lover. LaGravis let out a rumbling purr as he stretched languidly on the bed. "I think I'd like that." In a rush of movement, Longtooth extricated himself from LaGravis's grip and slid off the bed, cracking his back as he stood. The noise was surprisingly loud in the quietness of the night, and he let out a soft groan at the relief it provided. LaGravis yelped a bit as he was lifted off the bed and into the arms of the other lion. "Longtooth, this isn't necessary," he began, but his lover silenced him with a kiss as he padded into the luxurious bathroom attached to the king's quarters. "I know, but I want to do it anyway." Longtooth smiled as the bathroom torches lit up, revealing the large stone bathtub, perfectly big enough to fit both of them inside. "Besides, I'm feeling surprisingly very good tonight." The end.